Ladies and gentlemen, this joiner's bench is a hit. It has already been built by a lot of people. You can go on Instagram right now and see dozens of photographs of this bench at work in people's shops. And I've built it myself. I can tell you this bench is cheap and easy and fast. But none of that matters, unless it's also good. My favorite book on workbenches is by Chris Schwartz, and it's called Workbenches: From Design and Theory to Construction and Use. And in this book, Chris lays out a really simple test for figuring out whether a bench design is any good. A good woodworking bench has to be able to work on the faces, edges, and ends of boards. If it can't do that, it fails. Now, this sounds like a really basic test, but I think we've all worked on benches that failed this test pretty badly. So, how's the joiner's bench do? This is an average board for me, and if I want to plane the face, I tap up my planing stop and get to it. The board is held flat on the bench, and the stop is surprisingly easy to use. You can make one of these out of spare parts, and I've got a video that will show you how. With the face dressed, I drop my board into my DIY leg vise, and I can do the edge. Most of the things I want to do to the end of a board can also be handled in the vise, but it's important to clamp the board next to the vise screw to prevent racking. I'm still getting used to this vise, and I sometimes need to move things around before I start sawing or chiseling. So dovetailing that board would be easy in the vise, but what if the end needed to be cut to length and squared off first? No problem. Just strike your cut line and then put the board in a bench hook. This is another of those shop appliances you can just make from scraps, and it holds the wood securely while you saw the end. I'm using a Western-style back saw here, but I've designed this bench hook to work with any fine-cutting saw. If you want to use the Deluxe saw from the Woodwork for Humans series, just flip the bench hook and grab the far edge of the bench. Then, your pull strokes will be working against the mass of the bench, and your work will be held steady. One of the key features of this bench is that it's pretty narrow. A real beginner's mistake is to build a huge bench that's much too wide, but a narrower bench like this means that it's very easy to reach across it and grab your tools. You never want a bench that's so big that you're always walking around it to grab stuff. That's a huge time waster, and your bench can probably be a lot more narrow than you think. This one is 24 inches wide, but you could go narrower if you wanted to. It's really surprising how slender some historical benches are. After you have a board sawn, you might need to square and smooth that tough end grain. The tool for this is the shooting board and a sharp plane. Shooting is a pretty forceful operation, and you might see a flimsy bench shake under the strain. But the joiner's bench looks steady, and this end grain is nicely trimmed. So my bench passes the basic Chris Schwartz test. But I wanted to take it even further. I wanted the most vicious, ruthless criticism I could possibly find. So I asked the internet. People were most concerned with how rigid and stable this bench is, which makes sense. Here's the toughest test I could come up with. I have a very rough board of dense hardwood here. I'm going to put one end against the planing stop. Then I'll grab the opposite corner with a notched batten and a holdfast. This is an old method of work holding, and it's really secure. Now, I'm going to come straight across the board with a heavy scrub plane. The bench does move a little bit under the force of the plane. This bench is made of softwood, and it's not as heavy as a hardwood bench. If you apply a lot of force across the top, it will lift up a little bit. In practice, this little bit of movement doesn't bother me. The work stays steady, and I can plane in several directions, and in about a minute, I've taken this rough sawn board down to clean wood. People are also concerned that this bench has a top made of thin, softwood planks. They don't think it's going to be stiff or heavy enough for hard pounding on. But I built this bench with a bunch of thick cross pieces under the top, and the planks are screwed directly to those supports. This construction simulates a thicker slab top and absorbs force really well. If I need to hit something, I can always position the work over a cross piece. I've got one right in front of the vise. And if I rotate the work, there's another cross piece in the middle of the bench. I can reach both of them with a single holdfast hole, and I'm ready to chop. I hit pretty hard when I'm chopping a mortise, but you can see that the piece isn't jumping around and the bench isn't flexing under these hits. I'm doing precise work here, and the stock is steady. But let's really wail on this bench and drive in some old-fashioned cut nails. I'm hitting hard enough to make the camera shake, but the bench is doing fine. It's not hard to sink a fastener using this bench. And yes, I did just nail that board down to the top of my bench, and no, I didn't do it on purpose. I just got carried away. But one of the things about this bench is there's maybe $15 worth of wood in the top. I expect that after 5 years of heavy use, it's gonna get so damaged, I'm just gonna have to replace it. I'm okay with that. Now, a lot of people on the internet have also said that this top is going to go out of flat and it's not going to be stable for me. Well, Smarty Pants Internet, I've got news for you. The top of this bench is completely not flat, not even close. And that's kind of to be expected. I built this bench in winter when it was really dry, and now it's springtime here in Ohio. The air is much more humid and the top has moved a little bit. That's a really standard thing with any solid wood bench, hardwood or softwood. I'll flatten it again over the next couple of days and maybe another time sometime this year. And after that, I can expect this bench top to settle down and really not need much in the way of flattening going forward. I haven't really covered sawing for stock breakdown yet. And the truth is, I think big sawing operations are pretty clumsy on most high benches. I really prefer doing big saw cuts on my low bench, where I can use my body weight and better ergonomics. On the joiner's bench, you can do a long rip cut in the vise, but you're always moving the piece up as you progress in the cut. You can also hang the board off the end of your bench and rip using this overhand technique. I don't use this technique as much, and you can see me struggling with it. All these sawing operations are just a lot easier on the low bench. People often ask me if they should build the joiner's bench or the low bench. And the truth is, I think you might want to build both. Having both of those benches gives you just a huge range of options for tackling different operations. And if you start with the low bench, that's a great stepping stone for coming up and building the joiner's bench. Sometimes people ask me what I don't like about this bench, and the truth is, I don't like these diagonal braces. They get in the way of a lot of things I want to do, like store tools under the bench. I'd really like to get rid of these and replace them with a shelf instead, but I don't think I should. You see these diagonal braces on a lot of the historical benches, and those old boys knew what they were doing. They wouldn't have wasted the time or the materials on these braces unless they were really important, so I think they need to stay. But who cares what I think? Let's test it. I'll start at the far side of the bench, where there are no diagonal braces. I'm putting these mallets on the bench because they're wobbly. They'll exaggerate any movement in the bench. Now, I'll shove on the bench as hard as I can. I'm trying to make it rack, and as you can see from the mallets, it's working. The bench isn't moving across the floor, but it is flexing lengthwise. This isn't a problem because I never apply this force to this part of the bench when I'm actually working. But I do put this exact kind of stress on the other side of the bench every time I plane a piece of wood. Racking on that side would be very bad. So I move the mallets over and shove on the side with the diagonal braces. I'm pushing just as hard, but the mallets are hardly moving. This side of the bench is much more stable. As I put force along the bench in this direction, it hits these braces, and the brace plus the apron plus the leg forms a big right triangle. These are really stiff, and they really effectively prevent the bench from flexing. As much as I don't like them, I think I need to leave them. Now, I also mentioned before that the bench wasn't quite as heavy as maybe you'd want it to be. And you could be wondering why the bench didn't move across the floor while I was shoving on it. Well, a couple days ago, I cut some little squares of old yoga mat and tucked them under each leg. This little bit of extra grip is more than enough to keep the bench in place. There is one problem with this bench the way I've designed it. In order for these holdfasts to work well, you also need to put in some pieces of blocking underneath the holdfast holes. They're very easy to install. But if you end up with one of your holdfast holes near the end of a piece of blocking, it's probably going to split on you. I've only had this problem with the holdfast hole that's closest to me. So I pulled the board and replaced the softwood blocking with a piece of oak. You can see the new block on the left side of the screen. I wanted the hole to end up in the middle of the block, so I'm chiseling out a little bit of that 4x4 support so the hole can be a little further over. When you're putting in your holdfast holes, you might want them to be more centered in between the braces. If I were building the bench over again, I would move this one because I use it all the time. The other ones haven't been a problem. So, should you build this bench? Well, I can't tell you that. I can say that if you built a hardwood bench with traditional mortise and tenon joinery, it would probably be stiffer than this bench, and it would definitely be heavier than this bench. But I've spent a ton of time researching historical and modern woodworking benches, and I've never seen another bench that offers this much utility while still being so quick and easy to build. I built the basic bench in 2 days, and it wasn't very difficult. And I spent another day and a half building the vise and adding the different work holding options. And as far as cost goes, I built everything, including the vise, for under $250. And I know that a lot of people have built it even more cheaply by scavenging some of the wood. So if you're looking to get going in hand tool woodworking, this is probably a great option. Now, I'm not a beginner. I've been doing this for a while, and I've done several projects on this bench. Like just last week, I did this modern high stool made entirely from a single 2x4. The only bench I used was this one, and I was totally happy with the way it worked. It did everything I wanted. So if you'd like to build this bench, I have plans that are free. They have been free ever since I came up with the idea, and tons of people have already used those plans to build this bench. I've also got deluxe, more detailed plans in full color. I've got plans for how to build the vise and plans for all of the different viseless work holding options. And because I know my viewers appreciate value, I have taken everything for this bench, all the different stuff, and put it together into one big joiner's bench bundle. If you bought all the plans for this separately, it would cost you $15, but I'm selling this bundle for $10. If you'd like to grab it, you can click the link down in the description or go on over to rexkruger.com/store. Plan sales are a huge part of what supports this channel, and I really appreciate it when people pick something up from my store. The other people I super appreciate are my patrons. I'm always talking about what a great community they are, but recently that community has gotten even better because we've rolled out a discourse discussion board, and it has been so popular with my patrons. There are people on that board every single day asking questions, talking about tools, showing off their projects. Every time I get on there, I don't even know which thread to look at first. It is incredibly fun, and it's great to see my patrons talking to each other more because they really are a great community. If you'd like to be part of that community, go on over to patreon.com/rexkruger and check out all the early access, benefits, and rewards that I have just for my patrons. For instance, that plan bundle I was just talking about, well, all of my patrons got it for free this morning. And anyway, this whole bench project has been an incredible adventure. It just started with a picture on the internet, and I couldn't help looking at more pictures and then finally building the bench. And it has succeeded, honestly, beyond my wildest dreams. I love it. This is my main bench now. And this bench is going to take the Woodwork for Humans series into the future. I'm so excited about it. I'm so excited about the things that we're going to build. And I hope that you stick with me while we do these projects. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching.